Today we're joined at the studio by Jason Hynes. He's a lawyer and will be talking to us about contracts for creatives, specifically for photographers. This is part 2 of his talk. Part 1 was about copyright. Check it out if you haven't. And while Jason is based in Canada, he does talk about a lot of the things that are different in the US. There's a lot of information in here and we hope it brings a lot of value to you. Thank you, Jason, for teaching this for free, as well as letting us put it up here on YouTube.
Let's talk about contracts, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago. Contracts don't have to be scary, they don't have to be intimidating, and they don't have to be confusing, and they shouldn't be confusing. I will say that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, okay? Almost all of the disputes I've seen over contracts arise because you go to sort something out after people have a falling out, or there's some disagreement, and you open the box and look for the contract, and there isn't one. Or it doesn't have a lot of the information that you need. It doesn't have all the details. So the more you can be proactive and do these things up front and think about these things up front, and that's part of the reason I'm here today, just to give you an awareness of these issues, you'll be in a better position to understand what your rights are, to manage those rights and enforce them, and deal with any fallout when things go sideways, okay? Things may never go sideways for you, and if that's the case, I'm happy for you, but sometimes they do, and I've seen it firsthand. If you don't have things in writing, it's a real mess. And when lawyers say something's a mess, that's code for it's fucking expensive, okay? If it's fuzzy and it's a mess, it's really fucking expensive, all right? So here's what it comes down to, okay? It's not complicated. You really want to sit down the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, and the how much, okay? That's it. And we'll go through some key examples over the next couple of slides. Who? So the first thing to think about from a contract is, who are you? Are you an individual? Do you have a team of people working with you? Are you registered? Do you have a registered company? Are you working as an individual photographer? Is there a partnership? What's the legal nature of the business? Okay? You'd be surprised how often people don't understand this. I've had clients tell me that their company name is X Limited, and I look at the information and go, that company doesn't even exist. You've been working on this for 10 years. Buying and selling things with a company doesn't actually exist. The name is totally different. They don't pay attention to that stuff. It's very important. Get your legal name right. Figure out who you are, okay? Who are you doing business with? Who are your clients? Are you doing business with a bride and a groom? That comes up sometimes. Are you doing business with a company? If you're doing business with 2 people or 3 people, please get them all to sign the contract. Make them all personally liable. If you're doing business with a bride and a groom, right, you want both of them to be on the hook when there's money owing, right? You want to make sure that, let's say they have a huge falling out. If your contract is only with the groom, he may not be very interested in paying his bills. Okay, I hate to say it, things do go sideways sometimes. Okay, get people to sign the contract. Figure out who you're doing work for and who you're taking instructions from. Get them to sign the contract. What are you doing? What are you being asked to do? What do they want? Are you setting up a one-time relationship? Is this a one-off thing? Is there an ongoing relationship? What's it look like? Try to understand up front and have a discussion with the client about what they're actually looking for, what their expectations are. If you're doing a photo shoot, how many shots are you doing? Is it a time shoot, like is it 30 minutes and whatever you get in the 30 minutes is great? Is it, I want to get 100 good shots of something and then we'll take the best 10? Have these conversations up front. Not everybody's going to be interested in this, but just be aware that these are things you want to think about. This is a big one. Who's going to own what afterwards? Okay. The default rule is the author is the first owner. So the photographer is the first owner. Maybe you want to change that. Maybe they're willing to pay you a premium to be the owner of some portion of the work. Maybe they just want digital prints and you can use everything else. You can continue to have maybe you give them a license to the digital for social media purposes. Figure out what you want to retain, figure out what you want to use, and how much they're willing to spend for it. Okay?
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a lot of questions.
It's okay.
So, Jess and I work together a lot, and she takes pictures of my poetry book.
Yeah.
So she would be the #1 author, but when we're creating contracts together, how do we put that together? Because it would be images of my work, and I'd be the #1 author of that.
So I want to understand that a little better. She's taking images of the, like promotional images of the book, or is it?
like photos, kind of promotional as well, yeah.
Okay.
Of the book with images of
Do the images go in the book?
Yes.
So they're.
Oh,
so
no. Not her images, don't go
Right.
inside the book.
Okay.
Well, let's think back to first principles. You're the author of the book on poetry. So you're the first owner of the book on poetry. She's the author of the photographs. So she's the first owner of the photographs. So between the two of you, you've got to figure out who's going to own the photographs. Maybe you're okay with that relationship, right? Maybe she's you put them up on a website, use it to promote the book, you pay her some fee, but by and large, she retains ownership and you just get a license to use them on your website. Maybe that's all you need, right? If you go on a big mass, branding tour, maybe you're, selling books all across the country, you want to put them on some standees, some other promotional materials, maybe now there's going to be a different relationship, okay? So it's sometimes hard to know up front where things are going to go, but just give that some thought, right? The other thing practically is, and don't take this the wrong way, but how easily can her work be replicated? Okay, I'm assuming you still have the book, and if there's a falling out here, is it you, Jess? I'm Jess. Okay, so if there's a falling out here, and she doesn't want to ever give you her books, the photographs of the books again, well, you could say, well, I miss Jess, but I'll get someone else to take the photographs of my book, okay? And you'll sort that out. The wedding thing isn't quite so interchangeable, right? If the first wedding photographer absconds with the photographs, I'm not going to get married again just for the purposes of having some nice photographs, okay? So understanding how replaceable the work is can actually be really significant in both in determining value, but also how much time you spend figuring out the contract, right? There probably isn't a contract between you guys on the photographs. I'm not surprised, right? Do you guys have a deal?
We kind of have a contract.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's better. And see, good. And put it in writing, even better. Okay. If you do wedding photography, please put a written contract in place. If you're not, you're just setting up yourself all kinds of problems. Okay. That's a good question. What use is being contemplated? Understand the use. If it's private use for a wedding, you can sort of figure out most of the time how broadly these are going to go. There's some exceptions. You've had a really interesting situation with your photographs. That's a bit unusual, I think. By and large, it's largely private use for wedding photographs versus commercial use for advertising, where they may show up in all kinds of prints. Do you want to restrict subsequent private uses? Remember, if you're commissioning a photograph, the person commissioning the photograph has some inherent rights to use them for private use. I can post them on social media. Maybe you want to lock me out of that, right? Maybe you want to restrict it and keep it much more locked down. You can do all that through a contract. Okay. Where? If you're doing a photo shoot, where is it being done? Is it a specific location? Is it multiple locations? We talked about this already. What country's laws, this is really important, what country's laws govern the agreement? Pick Ontario. Ontario's a nice place to do business, right? We have nice courts. They're pretty reasonable. They're not the fastest, but you're not going to get some crazy decision from maybe a judge maybe in Alabama. And I'm currently fighting a case in Alabama, so I can say that with some honesty. Figure out start dates. What day does this contract start? Are there specific dates for a shoot? Are there dates when the proofs will be delivered? A final delivery date for something final, like final prints, digitals. When do you get paid? This is a nice one. It's nice to get paid. I like to get paid. I'm sure you like to get paid. Do you want to get paid up front? You want to get some percentage of the money up front? Think these things through, put them in the contract. How long are you going to store originals? How long are you going to store digital prints for? I suspect by now most people are storing them for a period of time. They can be downloaded, and at some point you just wipe that stuff away because storage is not free. It's cheap, but it's not totally free. How much are you getting paid? Is there a certain payment schedule? Have you figured it out in advance? What about things like out-of-pocket expenses? Who's paying for those? Venue fees, travel costs, all of that stuff. Figure that stuff out in advance. What about cancellation? What if they cancel? You're going to keep a deposit? Is the deposit entirely non-refundable? Is part of it refundable? Is there blackout periods that if you cancel within 7 days, if you cancel a year out, you can probably rebook pretty easily. If you cancel the day before, well, you're basically giving up all the revenue because you can't just rebook something 24 hours beforehand, right? So having windows when you can't cancel and penalties associated with that. Yes?
I think in the States there's some rules about contracting where if you sign for something, you've got 3 days to change your mind. I'm in the interior design side of things, and
Yep.
there are US designers that will not start any work until 3 days has gone by after their contract is signed. Is there anything like that in Ontario?
Good question. I don't know. That's basically what, those are like cooling off periods, consumer protection rules. I'm not aware of anything like that per se. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So yeah, I don't know. Good question. I imagine there is. I'm just thinking now, I think it's kind of industry specific. I think like things like cell phone contracts or maybe even buying a car, there's rules around that. I just don't know about photographs. I'm sorry.
My car is 7 days.
Is it 7 days? Yeah, okay.
I once backed out of a contract.
Oh yeah?
on a
Okay.
car,
So there you go. It's good to know, right? I mean, these things are,
Specific to Ontario, that one, and I only know that because I bought it, and then I was like, heck, I was kind of a dick, and I don't want to give him my money, and then I contacted somebody, and they were like, you have 7 days to get out
Yeah,
of
that's
this.
good to know, yeah.
But the dealership tried to give me a hard time, and then
Yeah.
I was like, no, it's fine.
Yeah,
Is it
that's
only for
surprised.
brand new cars or used ones too?
Yeah.
It was for new cars, so I'm not really sure, but but I think you're right about industry specific.
I think it's highly specific. And that's a relatively new phenomenon, right? Like we had this theory in sort of contract law for a long, long time that if you're going in to enter into a contract, you could just negotiate, right? You can negotiate with Walmart. They'll be fair to you, won't they? The reality is they're not, right? They're going to screw you over. So you have no bargaining power, like zero. So we have seen in the last couple of generations the rise of a lot of consumer protectionism, which is really meant to give the purchasers who don't have a lot of bargaining power some rights to back out and so on. So maybe there is going to be something like that on the photography side. I've never seen it. Interior design makes sense. I mean, those are big ticket items, lots of money being spent. The interior designer is going to go out of pocket for a lot of things, right? So, oh no? Oh, okay, well there you go. So now see, I'm learning. I didn't know that.
Is there a difference between the wording of non-refundable deposit versus retainer? Photographers always like, this is a thing we talk about, like we all know we're lawyers, but like there's photographers that say you should never use the term retainer. That means that they could get their money back. We should always say non-refundable deposit.
Yeah, retainer is more like I've got your money and I'm holding it in trust until I've done the services that I promised you. And so I'm sort of pretending that I'm going to keep it safe for you until we actually spend it. So it is technically refundable. A non-refundable deposit, I think, is a very different concept.
So it should specifically be.
I would certainly use things like non-refundable. If it's non-refundable, right? If it's a $100 booking fee for a session, you want to make it clear that this is non-refundable. Right. If you say, well, give me like a non-refundable deposit of $1,000, and I say, well, I'll just give you $5,000, hold the rest as a retainer, and if I back out, then I'll take the $4,000 back. Okay. Just make it clear, right? So just if you don't, so here's a great rule of thumb. If you don't understand what a word means, ask somebody, or explain it in the written document, right? If you think retainer means, when I say retainer, it means that I get to keep your money if you back away. Well, that's what that's going to mean, okay? But you're better to try to find the right word. And that's what lawyers do most of the time. We're just reading dictionaries, trying to find the right word for things. Just don't tell anybody. We're not really that smart. So cancellation's a big one. What if they cancel? Here's an even bigger one. When can you cancel? I'm sure you've had clients that are huge assholes that are a huge problem. At some point, it's not worth your time. So can you build something into your contract that lets you get out of there because I'm done with these guys, I don't want to be involved in them anymore. So think about that. Think about what the terms are. And you can probably get a sense when you meet somebody for the first time that they're going to be really easy to deal with or they're going to be a huge nightmare. So maybe you put a premium on somebody when you know someone's going to be difficult. Maybe you build in a huge premium to say, look, this is going to be a rough go. Maybe it's worth the money, but be ready to walk away if it's the right thing for you. Okay, but build it into the contract because you guarantee if you do it, people are going to be pissed off. Okay. Releases, you probably know a lot more about this than I do personally, but make sure you get the right releases. You can build those into the contract. Releases for personal use, for commercial use. If there's releases involved in certain venues. We talked about the Perimeter Institute. The Eiffel Tower one, that's something new I'd like to learn more about. So maybe you can get a release from the Eiffel Tower if you want to have it in the background for certain wedding photographs. I don't know, good to know. Limits on liability, acts of God, injury, illness. What happens if you get sick? What happens if they get sick? What happens if Jane and John don't get married on July 7th, 2017? What happens if the digital files are caught in a fire? Do you have backups? If you don't have backups, what happens if they are lost? Who's responsible for that? Putting all these things and thinking about all these things. They don't all have to be in the contract, but these are the kinds of things you should be thinking about if you're not already doing so. And the more you can specify these in the contract, the better, right? Ideally, you don't want to have liability for any of these things. right? If there's an act of God, if there's rain or hail, you don't want that to be your problem. Things like extras, we talked about fees for travel, fees for assistance, if you have to buy something. Subcontracts with videographers, I'll come back to this in a second. Venue fees, retouching, not just the fees, but how much control are they going to have? How much control are they going to have overall on the selection of proofs and all that stuff? Black and white versus color. If you have a certain style, presumably they knew that going in, but maybe they only want black and white photos. Maybe you don't work in black and white, or you don't like your stuff in black and white. This gets into your sort of reputation and your sort of moral rights issues. Subcontracts with videographers and subcontracts with other vendors generally can be a little bit of a problem, right? Because if you're kind of the head contact, the main contact for the client, and all of a sudden there's 3 or 4 people or even one person that's working for you as a subcontractor, effectively you're sort of stuck in the middle, right? So if they don't deliver on whatever they promised, there's now a contract between you and the subcontractor, and the third party, the client, may not have a direct contract with the subcontractor. Okay, which means that you're on the hook for if they don't deliver the product. It can be damaging to your reputation. It can be time-consuming and stressful for you to chase these folks down. So you may want to consider restructuring the relationship where, if you bring in someone who's a videographer and say, hi, I'd like you to meet so-and-so, you do your own deal, right? I'm not the intermediary. I don't want to be the man in the middle or the person in the middle chasing this person down, so the client can do their own direct contract with the videographer and with other subs. That's going to depend on all kinds of things, the nature of the relationship, how long you may have worked with this person, how trustworthy they are. I would say if it's a new relationship, if it's a new subcontractor, I would be very careful about putting yourself in a position where you're exposed. We do a lot of work with international law firms. I work for law firms all over the world, and vice versa. They send us work, we send them work. And when it's in the usual course of business, a firm I've been working with for a long time, they will bill me and I will bill the client, because I know they're going to do the work. I've known these guys 10 years. They're going to send me a reasonable bill, and the client's going to pay the bill. But I'm stuck in the middle. If one person doesn't deliver or screws something up, or if the client doesn't pay, I'm now in the middle. For new relationships with new firms, or where there's a lot of dollars and cents on the line, like if it's something really, really big, I'll basically kick it out the door and say, no, I'm not in the middle anymore. You guys work this out together. I'll sort of sit as a third party consulting, but I'm not going to be on the hook for $100,000 of legal fees if something goes sideways between you two. Okay? Any questions about contracts? Okay. There's lots of precedents floating on the internet. Yeah.
Sorry, everybody. I'll just, this will be my own personal private workshop. So we all have model releases of, I think every photographer has a model release in their contract.
Yeah.
My clients are the ones signing it, but there's 150 people at the wedding.
Yep.
Are they signing off the rights to all of the 147 other people that are going to be at this wedding?
What do you think?
I'm going to say that any of those people could tell me at any point that I can't use their photos.
Yeah.
So is there, like, when it comes to a model release, some kind of, like, if I take a photo of you, they're at public, I can still use that? Like the news, typically you see people walking like their butts, never their faces.
Right.
But is it the face that they could say, no, this is my face, you can't use that?
Yeah. Typically what you're starting to engage with are privacy rights. So the right of somebody sort of to remain private and not have identifiable characteristics displayed. So that's what really gets engaged. And that's part of the reason you see people from behind and not necessarily the faces. I certainly don't think that you can sign off and waive 147 people's individual rights of privacy. What I have seen in practice, and I've been at one wedding where there was there was a TV show shooting there. It was on one of those, what was the name of the show?
3 weddings or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, it was like where they remake old wedding dresses, something like that. Anyways, it was and what they had prominently posted at different points in the venue was they said, "Hey, dummy, we're shooting a TV show. Your face is going to be on TV. If you don't like it, basically leave. You have to go." And they worded it much more professionally than I did.
Considering even just having my clients put on their wedding website, like, you will be photographed during this, because it's such a pain if I go and vlog an entire wedding and I'm like, oh, look at this sweet little ring bearer, and then the ring bearer's mom is like, you've cut every single photo that includes this ring bearer.
Putting it on the website is good, yeah?
We had Bell Media come and shoot a wedding at Hacienda in last September, the one in 2017, for a TV show, and they did exactly that.
Yeah.
They at Hacienda they posted like just 8x10 photo frames all over the venue, just being like, hey, this is going to be photographed, videotaped, it's going to be on Bell Media, like on a TV show. Same kind of thing that you said, where like if you don't like it.
It's at least an attempt. I'm sure they can still come and be like, excuse me, I don't want it.
If you don't like it, put some clown makeup on, right? Something, yeah.
No,
I would say, my next wedding, we'll see. Don't tell Karen. But I have to say, the first couple years we were married, she was the one who was always watching those wedding shows, looking at the dresses. I'm like, are you planning your next wedding? She's like, maybe. I would say putting it on the website is one idea, but I like the idea of it being physically at the location, because not everyone's going to go to the website. Sure. And the more people you catch with that, and that's why they're everywhere, right? The more people you catch with that, the harder it becomes for them to argue later, I didn't know, right? You didn't tell me. I mean, if it's everywhere at the venue, then there's no way they can avoid it.
Right. Like couples have done like different like cheeky versions of it too. You know, the ones that are always like, you know, like your drunken shenanigans are going to be captured by our photographer.
Right. Yeah, that's true. It's like, this will live on forever.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't know that today with the rise of social media, I mean, I did really stupid stuff as a kid and none of it was documented. I have to say that's not the case with my kids anymore. So a lot of times have changed. Yeah.
I think it becomes a bigger concern with, like Lindsay said, with a mom who doesn't want their children on social media.
For sure.
So in that, like, posting that you have around the venue, just saying, if you don't want your photo produced on social media, let the photographer know, and then you or your children will be excluded.
Yeah.
Instead of, I think it also comes down to like if you do it and then they contact you and tell you to take it down, you just take it down right away. Like there's been other photographers that get their backs up about that. I'm like, it's not your kid.
No, it's. I think that's sort of how you react to those kind of situations as well. Practically speaking, people get pretty defensive about their kids. So, I think that's a good sort of mantra. Yeah, I know. I was being a bit tongue-in-cheek there, but yeah, if you have any concerns, you can just sort of let them know, or maybe there may even be like certain areas where they could be seated, right? Like they're not going to show up in the main shots, or if you know kind of who the red flags are, you can give them an orange sign to hold up or something, or green screen the face or something.
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of stuff that photographers put in our contracts that we actually don't control. Like we say these things like, you can't have other photographers at your wedding.
Yeah.
They don't control their guests. If their guest takes a camera out, they're not about to stop their ceremony and be like, excuse me.
Yeah.
Our photographer made us sign off on it.
Right.
But I feel like there is some like awkwardness about what we believe that our rights are versus what the bride and groom reasonably can even do about it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that's a good maybe segue into my next sort of slide, which is kind of what to do when somebody's being a bad guy. And we talked about it earlier. There are rules, and then there are how those rules are interpreted, how people individually interpret them, how people disagree, and how those things lead to fights. And that's why we have litigation. That's why things that end up in front of the courts. The first thing you can do is you can do nothing, which is sort of to your point. Like a lot of times, if somebody pulls out a little sort of digital camera and is taking a few shots during the ceremony, probably not going to be a big deal for you. If somebody shows up with a huge zoom lens and is there with like a professional pack of gear and 3 assistants, totally different story, right? All of a sudden now they're competing with you, and that's totally offside. So your response is going to be measured by the significance to your business, but also what you had in the contract, right? The more you have in the contract like that, at least you have legal rights to fall back on if you need to. In some cases, if somebody takes your photograph, you may just want to ask for a photo credit, right? Like sometimes there'll be something on social media where somebody's using your photograph and they're clearly violating copyright law, or you think they are, but maybe it's actually good publicity for you, right? Maybe it's actually a good segue back to get more work. As long as they can say, hey, I'm happy for you to keep using this, just give me a shout out, maybe put a link to my Instagram account or something like that, so that they can say, here's this great photographer, because maybe they're actually singing your praises and talking about how great you are, right? On the theme of criticism, if it's positive criticism, maybe that's really, really good for you. So don't immediately react and say this is necessarily bad. P.T. Barnum used to say there's no such thing as bad publicity, right? All publicity is good publicity. You might want to just request they take it down, right? I mean, that's sometimes these, especially certain social media sites, will have a way to just request to be removed. You can send a DM to the person there. A lot of times people don't realize, right? Like, people don't often think about what they're doing on the internet as being infringing copyright, right? It's a little bit more obtrusive when you're going and downloading something from BitTorrent or sneaking a camcorder in to watch the Avengers movie and record it, right? That's pretty obtrusive. They know what they're doing is probably offside. But you're just reposting an image on the website, you find, or taking an image and posting it in a different context, they may be doing it innocently. So sometimes simply requesting they remove it might get you the result you want. There's something called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the DMCA, which gives you the right to file a more formal notice and takedown requirement, which allows you to actually send a request to the site that's hosting it. And there's every website, every social media site will have like a DMCA procedure you can go. It's a simple procedure. You can walk through it fairly easily without too much help from a lawyer. Basically, here's me, this is my content, you need to take it down. They typically respond by taking it down. The other side then has the opportunity to contest that and say, no, either it's fair use or fair dealing, or you're not the copyright owner, but they could maybe basically do a counter challenge and it could be reposted. But it's a quick way to get something down if they're not if they're not really cooperating, or the content, the publisher, the person who posted it isn't really cooperating, you can go right to the site and actually use the site's resources to do that. You can get involved in sending a cease and desist letter. Could be friendly, could be pretty nasty. Sometimes it's, a simple email from you might actually sort of escalate this a little bit. Could involve getting a lawyer involved to write letters. We do this kind of stuff all the time. We typically can make a good assessment pretty quickly as to whether something's offside or not, and what your rights are. But it's also a question of how much you want to spend, right? Not just money, because it does get expensive to go after some of these things, but also your energy and your stress level, right? I'm doing some work for a small, on a copyright issue for a small client out in Woodstock, and somebody's taken some of her stuff. It's a borderline case. We're trying to keep the cost down, but she's also very frustrated about this. It's very personal to her. It's something she's been working on for the better part of a decade. So, it's not just about the money for her. It's very emotional. So you have to decide whether having it out there is going to be worse than sort of the hassle of going through the fight, because it can be a little tough. It's sort of your point about Disney, Lindsay. Like, if you get into a big fight with Disney, you can expect it to A, be expensive, and B, be stressful and not over, in 24 hours. And at the end of the day, and this is not recommended at all, is you can go to litigation, right? You can take someone to court. We saw some cases today where the parties actually went to court over something. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, but inevitably it's very expensive. If you want to talk dollars and cents, you're looking anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000, $40,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars for more complicated cases. Okay, so not a pretty way to go, but it is out there if somebody's really offside. The Disney case, right? If it really was that important and Disney really was making a big show of this, it might be worthwhile taking them to task and trying to fight the good fight. Okay. Any questions about those? Okay. A couple of links here, and I'm going to circulate the slides through Lindsay, so anyone who wants to can have my slides. Fair use, fair dealing, share them. I don't really care. This is a sideshow for me. I don't teach professionally, so I'm happy to have people use my content. This is a pretty good site actually for photographers. And I tried to incorporate some of their tips into some of the stuff we've talked about today. It's not current. That's my only comment. Sometimes what they're saying may be a little bit dated. And that's one general comment for a lot of the stuff you see on the internet. First of all, you have to figure out where it is, because there's a lot of US stuff. There's a lot less in Canada. This is a Canadian one. And it's kind of updated whenever it's updated, right? There's nobody sort of making sure it's updated 24 hours after something changes. So rules change all the time, the laws change all the time. So just be careful when you get into something where you think you might be running afoul of something. It might be worth giving me a call or talking to someone to try to get some more information. The Canadian Copyright Act is a good reference. I don't know that you're going to ever want to spend time reading it, but if you ever want to think about something like architectural works, right, buildings, you can Google it and you can scroll through and you'll see the section which can help you even guiding your search if you're trying to find something on the internet. And then another one that's kind of useful, the U.S. Copyright Office. The U.S. gets a lot of criticism, but they do a good job with their IP rights of having information available for people to read. And just, manuals, guidelines, presentations on copyright law, FAQs, that kind of stuff. Just a good sort of central launch page for a lot of that stuff. keep in mind, it is US-centric, right? Duh, obviously. I didn't recommend the Canadian one because I don't have a lot of respect for the Canadian Copyright Office. They're not very good at what they do. That's my personal opinion. Sorry if that offends anybody. I do a lot of work with the Canadian and the US side. The US, they have faults, but they have their shit together. The Canadians are a little bit backwards on a lot of stuff. I find them really frustrating. So I also don't trust the Canadian content, okay? I'm not to go on a soapbox here, but the Canadian content I find you get from the government is really out of date, and it's often really in conflict with the law. The US does a much better job of actually saying this is the way things are, and they're based on the truth. So no fake news. Okay, that's it for me. Any questions? I'm happy to stick around, either in group or one-on-one after. Thanks.